In 1895, a man who walked out of the company he had helped create. On his way through the door, he made a prediction. The company would be dead within 6 months. He was wrong by 70 years. The company was called Gisholt. Welcome back to Trade Archive. If the machines and the people who built them are the reason you are here, subscribe and leave a like so we know you want more. The name is Norwegian. You pronounce it Gisholt if you grew up near Telemark, and Gisholt if you grew up anywhere in America, which is how most machinists say it. It is not a surname. It is not a brand invented by a marketing department. It is the name of a farm, a small property in the hills of southern Norway, where a boy named Jens Anders Jensen Skibnes spent childhood summers with his aunt and uncle. He was born on April 15, 1832, the oldest of 5 children. His parents, Anders and Åste, operated an inn near the lake at Norway. The family emigrated in 1844. They sailed to New York, traveled west to Milwaukee, and then walked 45 miles, children and parents together, on foot, because they could not afford the coach fare to Hart Prairie near Whitewater, Wisconsin. By 1852, they had settled in Pleasant Springs, near Lake Koshkonong. When Jens filed his naturalization papers, the clerk Americanized his name. From that day forward, he was John A. Johnson. Johnson entered the Wisconsin State Assembly in 1857, at 25, running as a Republican on positions that were extraordinary for a Norwegian immigrant farmer in antebellum Wisconsin. He opposed slavery. He supported the franchise for black citizens. He supported the vote for women. On November 4, 1860, he was elected clerk of the Dane County Board of Supervisors, a post he held for 8 years. Between those 2 elections, his life broke apart. His first wife, Karen Christie Thompson, whom he had married in 1856, died on March 16, 1860. She left him a newborn daughter, also named Karen. The infant survived barely 6 months. She died on September 15th of the same year. In half a calendar year, John A. Johnson lost his wife and his only child. He was 28 years old. He did not retreat. He sold the farm, moved into Madison, and threw himself into the clerk's office, working 7:30 in the morning to 11 at night. In the gaps between shifts, he taught himself German. On October 31, 1861, he married Kaja Nicoline Marie Kildahl, a Norwegian-born woman from a Milwaukee family. They would have 6 children: Frederick, Ella, Ida, Carl, Hobart, and Maurice. Johnson's grief did not disappear. It calcified into a kind of relentless, quiet drive that would define everything he built. He joined the Fuller family's ventures and became a partner on September 17, 1873, in what became the Fuller and Johnson Company, eventually rising to president. Fuller and Johnson made agricultural implements. Their plows carried names that read like frontier poetry: the Bonanza Prairie Breaker, the Eclipse Stone Dodger. They built tobacco transplanters and cultivators and sold them across the upper Midwest. Johnson also co-owned the Hekla Fire Insurance Company and the Chicago Norwegian newspaper, Scandinavian. By 1896, he was elected president of the National Association of Implement and Vehicle Manufacturers. He was a quiet man by his own description, reserved, uncomfortable with praise. The pivot came when the competition shifted beneath him. McCormick and John Deere joined forces to develop a harvester. Fuller and Johnson had nothing to match it. Rather than fight that battle, Johnson looked at the machines on his own factory floor, the lathes and tooling that made the agricultural implements, and saw the future in the tools themselves. Between 1885 and 1887, Fuller and Johnson began producing lathes for sale to other manufacturers. In January 1889, Johnson filed articles of incorporation for a separate company. He did not name it after himself. He named it after the farm. He underwrote the venture entirely. $41,000 in cash, every dollar his own. His 3 oldest sons built the first small frame factory adjacent to the Fuller and Johnson plant on East Mifflin Street. Power came from a rope belt strung across the road from the parent company. When it rained, the rope shrank and snapped, and the workers got an unscheduled holiday. To design the machine that would define the company, Johnson hired Conrad M. Conradson, a Madison area native with a bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Wisconsin. Johnson recruited him from the E.P. Alice Company in Milwaukee, where Conradson had built a reputation formidable enough that he was later called one of America's 6 mechanical geniuses. His assignment was specific: build a turret lathe capable of finishing large castings and forgings, the kind of heavy work that no existing machine could do efficiently. A turret lathe replaces the tailstock of a conventional engine lathe with a rotating indexable turret that holds multiple cutting tools. Instead of stopping the machine, unclamping a tool, setting a new one, and re-indicating, the operator rotates the turret to bring the next preset tool into position. The tool path is governed by mechanical stops, not by the operator's hand and eye. Once the setup is dialed in, one man can turn out identical, interchangeable parts all day long: studs, pins, brake supports, gear blanks, shell bodies. Part after part, each one within tolerance, each one the same as the last. That is what any turret lathe could do. What Conradson designed was different. Gisholt's machine was built from the ground up for heavy work. Where other turret lathes handled bar stock and small chucking jobs, Conradson's design could swallow 18 to 24-inch castings and finish them in a single setup. Locomotive cylinder heads, steam engine components, oil field couplings. Parts that were, until then, finished on engine lathes by experienced turners working slowly and carefully, one piece at a time. The Gisholt turret lathe took that work and made it repeatable, fast, and economical. It did not just improve production. It made a category of production possible that had not existed before. The Wisconsin Historical Society would later describe Gisholt as the first company to specialize in heavy-type turret lathes adapted to finishing of medium and heavy castings and forgings. Johnson was the sole financial backer. He had paid for Conradson's shares out of his own pocket, making the engineer a partner while absorbing all the risk himself. For a short time, the arrangement worked. The initial lathe design was completed, machines entered production, and orders began to come in. Then Conradson lost interest. His temperament was restless. Once the turret lathe was in production, the engineering challenge was finished, and Conradson's attention drifted to electric motors and generators. Johnson allowed the experiments at first. The relationship between the two men started to deteriorate. Conradson, by the account of the company's own historians, was neither a good businessman nor a good superintendent. He began dedicating Gisholt's funds, his time, his salary, and staff time to motor development, even though the turret lathe was the only product keeping the company alive. He split the workforce in two, one group building turret lathes, the other working on Conradson's personal projects. Manufacturing output slowed. Quality standards collapsed. Deliveries fell a month behind schedule. The crisis arrived as a European order. A new machine was to be shipped overseas, and Conradson had proposed going to set it up himself. When the machine was in transit, he changed his mind and refused to travel. Carl Johnson, John's son, went in his place. When Carl arrived, the machine did not work. The build quality had slipped so far under Conradson's divided attention that the product Gisholt shipped was not the product the customer had ordered. The contract was canceled. It was, in the understated language of the company's historians, a momentous failure. Johnson looked at what Conradson had done to his company and resolved to close the shop entirely unless conditions changed. Conradson expressed his desire to leave. The separation terms were negotiated in detail. Conradson was released from the original agreement to share profits and losses equally. He transferred to Johnson all patents obtained before January 1, 1895, and he agreed not to manufacture turret lathes or tool grinders in the United States for 3 years. On his way out, he made his prediction: 6 months. The company had already lost money for 6 consecutive years. The recessions of from 1890 to 1891 and from 1893 to 1894 had compounded the damage Conradson's mismanagement inflicted. Johnson injected another $79,000 of his own cash to keep the doors from closing. By any rational measure, the prediction should have come true. Johnson reorganized. Frederick became secretary. Carl became vice president and general manager. Hobart became treasurer and superintendent. Johnson's sons had not been handed their positions because of their name. He had insisted they learn the business from the ground up, starting on the factory floor, earning their authority through the ranks. They knew the machines because they had built them. The first break came at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, where Hobart ran the Gisholt display. Competing head-to-head against established firms including Pratt and Whitney, Gisholt won a bronze medal for design and earned prominent coverage in American Machinist, the trade publication that mattered most. The exposure led to the company's first turret lathe order, from the representative of Ernest Kirchner and Company of Leipzig, Germany, who contracted to sell Gisholt lathes through his European agencies. Machines shipped to Germany in 1894. Sales agencies opened in Boston, New York, Pittsburgh, and Leipzig. In 1897, Johnson sent Frederick to Berlin to establish the first permanent European branch office. The company recorded its first profit in 1895. In 1899, with the rope belt shop long outgrown, Gisholt built a factory in the 1200 block of East Washington Avenue in Madison. The plant cost $75,000 and was operated entirely by electricity, a conspicuous investment when most of the city's factories still ran on steam. Workers put in 10-hour days, 6 days a week. The company built a separate building for worker comfort and convenience, a detail that reflected Johnson's own experience. A man who had worked 7:30 to 11 at night for years understood what long hours cost. At the 1900 Paris Exposition Universelle, Gisholt won a gold medal in competition with the best machine tool builders in Europe and America. Johnson was too ill to attend. His sons accepted on his behalf. 4 years later, the company exhibited at the Palace of Machinery at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. Johnson did not live to see most of what the company became. His stomach ulcers, which had plagued him through the 1890s, killed him at his home in Madison on November 10, 1901. He was 69. Almost every politician, businessman, and university official in the city, along with several hundred of his employees, attended his burial at Forest Hill Cemetery. At a memorial service in the Fuller Opera House, Mayor Storm Bull delivered a eulogy that captured the duality of the man's entire life. He had never lost pride in his homeland, the mayor said, but he had also become the complete American. What Johnson built with $41,000 and a Norwegian farm name would now be run by his sons, and later his grandsons, for 6 unbroken decades. Carl, the vice president and general manager, ran operations with the same insistence on quality that his father had drilled into him on the factory floor. Hobart oversaw manufacturing. Frederick managed the European business from Berlin, where he and his family lived for years, selling Gisholt lathes to German, French, and British manufacturers who were building their own automotive and heavy industries. The company they inherited was profitable, growing, and internationally recognized, but it was still their father's creation. Their job was not to reinvent it. Their job was to protect what it stood for and let the machines do the selling. They did more than that. Under the second generation, Gisholt expanded its product line methodically, added factory floor space, and navigated the economic turbulence of the 1910s and 1920s without a major misstep. They had learned something from watching their father absorb 6 years of consecutive losses and $79,000 of personal cash without flinching. They ran conservative balance sheets, reinvested profits into tooling and facilities, and kept the workforce stable through downturns that closed other shops. Madison noticed. By the time the Depression hit, Gisholt was not just the city's largest employer. It was the anchor of the entire East Side manufacturing district, the company around which a neighborhood of machinists, toolmakers, and their families had organized their lives. Conradson, meanwhile, did not disappear. Once his 3-year non-compete expired, he founded the American Turret Lathe Manufacturing Company, with works in Wilmington, Delaware, and Warren, Pennsylvania. His machines were stamped Conradson and carried an 1899 patent date. They competed directly with Gisholt. In 1905, Johnson's Sons ended the competition by buying the American Turret Lathe Company outright and folding it back into Gisholt. The Warren, Pennsylvania plant became Gisholt's branch factory. The man who walked away in acrimony saw his breakaway line reabsorbed by the company he had tried to abandon. Conradson kept inventing for the rest of his life. He held roughly 59 patents, covering turret lathe mechanisms, rod feeding devices, automatic chucks, gear cutters, motor components, and later in life, bottle stoppers and glass grinding machines. In 1917, he founded the Conradson Machine Tool Company in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, relocating it to Green Bay within a year. Its entire output was consigned to the Chicago machinery dealer Joseph T. Ryerson and Son and sold under the Ryerson-Conradson trade name, milling machines, selective head lathes, planers, radial drills. That venture failed in 1922. In a federal court case, one of Conradson's turret lathe patents was held invalid, the court finding his improvements anticipated by prior work from Thompson, Warner, and Hartness. He died on May 18, 1940, at 78, and is buried at Maple Hill Cemetery in Evansville, Wisconsin, 40 miles south of the factory he once nearly destroyed. While Conradson chased one venture after another, the machines bearing the Gisholt name were becoming fixtures of American manufacturing. A 28-inch Gisholt turret lathe sat inside the Packard Motor Car Company factory, machining brake band supports from castings that arrived rough and left finished and dimensionally identical. The Peerless Auto Motor Car Company ran entire departments of nothing but Gisholt lathes, rows of them flanking each other, belt-driven from overhead shafts suspended from the ceiling, the operators standing in the aisles blurred by motion in photographs where only the machines stayed sharp. These were not job shops doing one-off work. These were production floors running the same part hundreds of times a day. And the turret lathe was the reason it was possible. Every cylinder Packard bored, every flywheel Peerless turned, every brake drum Buick finished fed demand back to Madison for more machines, more tooling, more support. The automobile industry did not just adopt the turret lathe, it depended on it. And Gisholt, by specializing in the heavy end, the big castings and forgings that the smaller turret lathe builders could not handle efficiently, had positioned itself at the center of the fastest-growing manufacturing sector in the country. By 1912, Gisholt was Madison's largest employer, the most significant industrial operation on the city's east side. The word Gisholt had begun entering the trade vocabulary as a generic term for a type of heavy turret lathe, the way machinists used Jacobs for a drill chuck, regardless of who made it. A Norwegian farm name had become an American industrial noun. The product line expanded steadily. By World War I, Gisholt was building vertical boring mills, screw machines, precision balancing machines, grinding machinery, and semi-automatic machines designed specifically for automobile flywheels and ring gears. The company became a major supplier of machine tools to the Allied war effort. George Steinle, who had spent 14 years as Gisholt's chief traveling salesman promoting turret lathes across Europe, struck out on his own in 1906 and founded the Steinle Turret Machine Company in Madison, building a full swing side carriage turret lathe of his own design. During the war, Steinle used his machines to manufacture 5-inch naval guns in a separate 600-man plant on Atwood Avenue. Even the competition carried Gisholt's fingerprints. The turret lathe line itself grew into 2 distinct families that any machinist of the era would recognize. The ram types, numbered 1 through 5, carried the turret on a ram that slid in and out of the headstock, lighter and faster to index, well suited to small and medium chucking and bar work. Machinists on the Practical Machinist forums still call the number 5 the Godzilla of turret lathes, a machine that could push a 2.5-inch twist drill through solid stock without a pilot hole and never complain. The saddle types carried an L designation, from the 1L through the massive 5L. On these machines, the turret was mounted on a saddle that traversed the full length of the bed, giving far greater rigidity for the heaviest cuts. There was no powered turret index on the saddle machines. The operator unlocked the turret in full retract, spun it by hand, and locked it down before the next operation. Running a saddle-type Gisholt for a 40-hour week was physical labor. The 4L weighed 25,000 pounds. Even a mid-size 2L came in at 7,400. The 5L was the oil country lathe, built with a spindle bore large enough to thread oil well pipe and couplings. It swung 40 inches over the bed, carried a 12.5-inch bore and a 36-inch 4-jaw chuck, and drew 50 horsepower through the headstock. These were not instruments. They were architecture. Through the 1930s, Gisholt extended the line into automatic and semi-automatic territory. The Masterline branding appeared on the saddle-type L-series machines, followed around 1950 by the Fastermatic automatic chucking turret lathes, models 1F and 2F, and the Simplematic line with tracer controls. Each generation moved closer to the automatic cycle that would eventually be replaced entirely by CNC, but in their era, these machines represented the frontier of what a turret lathe could do without a computer. The balancing machines became a story of their own. Gisholt entered precision dynamic balancing in the 1930s, developing the Dynetric line, machines that measured and corrected the rotational imbalance of crankshafts, flywheels, rotors, propellers, and armatures. They built a 50-ton machine to speed production of automobile crankshafts. The Gisholt method of balancing became a published standard. What made these machines remarkable was not their electronics, which evolved with the decades, but their bases. The massive cast-iron cradles were poured with such care and such material quality that they would prove to be the most enduring products Gisholt ever made. Decades after the company closed, the electronics would be stripped and replaced while the bases themselves kept working, because cast iron poured correctly does not fatigue, does not drift, and does not care what year it is. World War II consumed the American machine tool industry whole. More machine tools were built in the United States between 1940 and 1943 than in the entire 4 decades from 1900 to 1940. Every lathe, every boring mill, every grinder in the country was running flat out, and the factories that built those machines were hiring anyone who could hold a wrench. The War Production Board tracked the scale of the effort firm by firm. As of December 1942, Gisholt employed 2,690 people, ranking it the 8th largest machine tool builder in the country. It stood ahead of Jones and Lamson in Springfield, Vermont, at 1,775 employees, and behind Warner and Swayze in Cleveland at 5,027. Gisholt turret lathes were cutting parts for aircraft engines, tank transmissions, artillery components, and naval ordnance. The balancing machines were correcting crankshafts and propeller assemblies that would go into bombers, fighters, and the warships that carried them. The 1946 Engineering Building, the third and final structure in the East Washington Avenue complex, was built specifically to handle the post-war product development that the company's leadership expected to follow victory. They were right. The decade after the war was a golden period for American machine tools, and Gisholt wrote it with a workforce, a product line, and a reputation that had been tested under the most demanding production conditions the industry had ever faced. Those 3 companies were the 3 great American turret lathe builders. They made machines in overlapping size ranges, competed for the same defense contracts, and inspired the kind of brand loyalty among machinists that automobile marques inspired among drivers. A man who ran a Gisholt 5L would argue its superiority over a Warner and Swayze 5A with the conviction of someone defending family honor. The Warner and Swazi machines had a reputation for being more user-friendly, with more refined controls and a smoother operating feel. The Gisholt machines were considered heavier, more rigid, built to take punishment on big rough castings day after day without complaint. Jones and Lamson occupied a slightly different position with its Hartness flat turret design, which sat lower and offered different advantages for long bar work. Machinists who ran all three had strong opinions about each. In the shops that could afford to be choosy, the brand stamped on the headstock was a matter of professional identity. The three companies were not rivals in the way that word usually implies. They were parallel arcs, drawn through the same decades, serving the same industries, heading unknowingly toward the same cliff. At its peak in 1970, Gisholt employed over 2,000 people. The factory complex on East Washington Avenue had grown into three neoclassical revival brick buildings. The original from 1899 to 1901 factory, with its 7 distinctive sawtooth roofs, the 1911 office building, and the 1946 engineering building. What had started with a rope belt and $41,000 was now one of the most significant industrial operations in the state of Wisconsin. Giddings and Lewis, a machine tool builder based in Fond du Lac, acquired Gisholt in 1966. The acquisition added a 1/3 increase in production capacity and brought balancing machinery into G&L's product line. Over 4,300 employees worked for the combined company by the end of the decade. Then, 1970 arrived. It was the worst financial year in G&L's history. A net loss of $3.3 million on sales that fell to $95 million, down $8 million from the year before. In England, Rolls-Royce collapsed, and the shockwave hit metal-cutting firms across the Atlantic. G&L's board suspended its quarterly dividend for the first time since the Great Depression. The president slashed the payroll and halved management and sales salaries across the company. It was not enough. The corporate history records the decision in plain language. Management reluctantly decided to sell Gisholt in order to save over $3 million in overhead costs, and 1,200 people were put out of work. The closure was announced in January 1971. Roughly 875 of those jobs were in Madison. The name Gisholt, which had entered the English language as a common noun, which had been stamped on machines running in factories on 5 continents, which had started as the name of a Norwegian farm where a boy spent summers with his aunt and uncle, was finished. The same forces killed its peers within 2 decades. Warner and Swazi was bought by Bendix Corporation in 1980 for nearly $300 million. Bendix was swallowed by Allied Corporation, which sold the machine tool division to Cross and Trecker. The last Warner and Swazi plant in Solon, Ohio, closed in January 1992. Jones and Lamson was acquired by the conglomerate Textron in 1964. Textron split the company apart, moving the optical comparator line to South Carolina, the grinder line to Connecticut, and finally, the lathe work to Connecticut and Belgium. The workforce in Springfield fell from nearly 1,200 to about 200 by 1981. The factory closed in 1986, sat as a contaminated brownfield for 35 years, and was finally demolished in November 2021. 3 companies, 3 cities, 3 proud independent builders. Each was acquired by a larger corporation that had no emotional attachment to the product, no institutional memory of what it took to build a turret lathe that could hold tolerance for 70 years, and no interest in finding out. Each was treated as a line item on a balance sheet. Each was shut down when the numbers stopped working. The industry itself was undergoing a transformation that none of these companies survived. The turret lathe, the machine that had made mass production possible, was being replaced by numerically controlled machining centers that could be programmed, reprogrammed, and run with less operator skill. Japanese builders, investing billions in CNC technology while American firms clung to manual machines, were offering products that were faster, cheaper, and in many cases, more accurate. By 1986, 75% of numerically controlled machines sold in the United States were imports. The manual turret lathe did not become obsolete overnight, and in the right application, it still has not. But the market for new ones collapsed, and the companies that had built their identities around them collapsed with it. The Gisholt factory complex still stands at 1245 to 1301 East Washington Avenue in Madison. The three neoclassical brick buildings were designated a Madison landmark on September 7, 2004, and a historical marker was erected on the corner of the 1911 building in 2012 by the Madison Landmarks Commission. A modern skywalk now spans South Baldwin Street, connecting the old factory and office buildings. The current occupant is Shop Bop, an Amazon-owned online fashion retailer that spent over $5 million converting the factory into office space and warehouse, exposing the original sawtooth roof structures and preserving some of the original paint. A fashion e-commerce operation inside a turret lathe factory. The sawtooth roofs that once let northern light fall evenly across machine beds now illuminate photo studios where models pose in clothing that costs more per item than a Gisholt machinist earned in a week. Johnson would not have predicted it. He might not have minded. The buildings are standing. That matters more than what happens inside them. The balancing machines outlived everything else. A company called Balanstar Corporation today sells electronic retrofit kits for old Gisholt Dynetric balancer bases, replacing the long, obsolete analog electronics with Windows-based digital signal processing while leaving the original cast-iron cradles in place. Their marketing asks a question that doubles as a eulogy. Why scrap what was arguably the best machine base ever built when you can have a virtually brand new, state-of-the-art machine? The electronics become obsolete every decade. The iron does not. It was poured in Madison, Wisconsin by people who understood that the value of a machine is not measured in quarters. It is measured in decades. And it is still holding tolerance 3/4 of a century after it was cast. Used Gisholt turret lathes still surface on surplus dealers and machinist forums across the world. A man in Finland is restoring a 1L that belonged to his father-in-law, who passed away before they ever met. He posts on Practical Machinist in careful English, asking for oil grades, specifications, anything at all. A forum member in Michigan replies with scanned catalog pages from 1930 and the Finnish word sisu, which means something close to stubborn courage in the face of adversity, a word that could describe both the machine and the man trying to bring it back to life. Another machinist, somewhere in the American Midwest, posts a photograph of his 1944 number 5 with the single caption, "Beasts of Burden," and notes that the sound the old motor makes when the headstock engages has not changed in 80 years. The name started as a farm, where a boy was happy. It became a company that a grieving immigrant built with his own money, defended against a brilliant partner who tried to destroy it, and passed to his sons and grandsons to run for 6 decades. It became a generic English word for a type of machine that made the modern world possible. The farm is gone. The company is gone. The founder is buried at Forest Hill Cemetery in Madison, beside Kaya, who outlived him by 7 years. The man who predicted 6 months is buried at Maple Hill Cemetery, 40 miles south, having outlived the company by nothing at all. But the iron endures. In shops that smell like cutting oil and swarf, on concrete floors stained dark by decades of coolant, Gisholt turret lathes are still indexing, still cutting, still holding tolerance. If this is the kind of history you come to YouTube for, hit subscribe. The next video is already on screen. See you there.